So tonight, I'm very happy to have all of you here and welcome you to this presentation called Rowing the Grand Canyon with Randall Putz. This is a photographic journey of his trials and tribulations down the incredible Colorado River in the Grand Canyon, which happened this past June. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my esposa and entrepreneur extraordinaire and all the other good things Randy is. Randy Putz. I should have said mi esposa.
Thank you. It's really nice to see you all here. And this is an event that is certainly consistent with what Chirp is about. It's nature-based, but this is a special event because it is about my trip, and it's a very personal journey that I shared with 15 other people that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. I will begin with some numbers. So we spent 19 days doing the entire length of the Grand Canyon, which is 277 miles. We did it with 16 total people, including myself. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about these folks in a minute. We did it on 5 rafts. And we experienced some extreme conditions. That's a thermometer that I brought with me. You can see it has a low of 54 and a high of 135. And people think that the water in the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon is warm. It's actually very cold because it's the cold water coming out of the bottom of Lake Powell that feeds the Colorado River. So it's quite chilly. So we had extreme temperatures. I took over 7,000 photos. I figure that will only take us about 6-7 hours tonight. We'll have coffee brought in a couple hours. I know you guys are up for endurance events with me, but no, actually I spent days culling through all the pictures to pull out the very best ones. So it won't be 6 or 7 hours. So my trip begins here. This is a year ago at my daughter Tessa, who's on the right, her wedding to Will Scharfenberger to her left, and that's her family, her father-in-law, her mother-in-law, and her brother-in-law. They had gotten a permit, signed up for a permit quite a while ago for this trip, and Will had intended to go, but Will just graduated from law school, and he had to study for the bar. So he was not able to go, and I was fortunate enough to be invited along in Will's place. So his loss, my gain. We're still waiting to see how he did on the bar, but hopefully it was worthwhile. We started in Flagstaff. I drove across the desert late at night, got to Flagstaff at 3 in the morning. We all met at a house that the Moenkopi River Works owns. They came and picked us up, and we loaded up in Flagstaff, and then we drove 2 hours to Lee's Ferry, which is just below Lake Powell. And actually, we went in through some of the Navajo land, and we crossed the Colorado River on this Navajo bridge, and remember this because we're going to come back and revisit it. And we got our first glimpse of the Grand Canyon and of the Colorado River. And note the color of the river. It is pretty green and pretty clear, and we're way up on the bridge looking down at it. But just note how beautiful and clear it looks. Early that afternoon, we got to Lee's Ferry with all of our equipment. We were a private trip. This was a self-organized, self-financed trip. One of our party members had gone through the lottery to get a permit. They only allow, I believe it's 22,000 people a year to go down the Grand Canyon. It can take years to get a position. And we were lucky enough to do this, to win a position, and then we, actually I didn't, but Tom and others, organized all the equipment, organized a caterer, and this was all us doing it. We were not on a tour. We didn't hire people to do it. We did everything. We started to rig the boats. We filled them up. We started putting equipment on them. And that is a gentleman from Oenkopi telling us all about the details of these rafts, which we had to absorb in a very short amount of time. We hired a caterer for the food, but we had to bring all of our own drinks and alcohol. And there was a lot of beer. But we had to stock for the full 19 days. It's not like we were going to be resupplied anywhere along the way. And notice the green ones, and that is what I refer to as the Putzenwasser, which is Bud Light Lime. Lots of paddles. We ended up needing, oars. That's an important distinction. Lots of oars. We ended up breaking several. And here we are at the end of the first day, rigged and ready to go. And we hopped in our boats and went 100 yards downstream and camped. And that was part of the plan. It's kind of weird, though. You're like, let's go 100 yards. And we spent the night. One of the things that was challenging for me was that everything I read, everything I told was it was going to be very, very hot. And so I was prepared with a single cotton sheet. I was told, oh, you may even get it wet and put it over you to keep you cool. But I found out later that at Lee's Ferry, it's uncharacteristically cold, and it got down into the 50s. So I had a single sheet in my tent, 50 degrees, and I shivered all night long. I was not off to a good start. Here we are with the next morning with introductory meeting, talking about how things are going to go. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each person that was on the trip. So this is Tessa's father-in-law, Tom Scharfenberger, and he is a landscape architect that lives in San Francisco. This is his wife, Vicky, who is a lawyer. This is Sam Scharfenberger, Tessa's brother-in-law. He is going to school. He's working on his doctorate in microbiology at University of Washington in Seattle. This is another lawyer, and this is Danny. He's from San Francisco, and this is his wife, Debbie, and they're good friends of the Scharfenbergers, and he's the one that actually got the permit. She's a school teacher. This is one of their sons, Jonah. He is in international negotiations. I'll tell you more about him a little later. This is their other son, Sam. I think he's headed off to law school. This is his partner, Maria. She works in high tech. This is John Malone, another attorney from Reno. He was one of our boat captains. This is Nancy. She is a music teacher. She is another boat captain. Her husband, Bill, he's retired, and he was in healthcare. This is Greg, And he is a retired firefighter and paramedic who lives in Portland. This is Glenn. He's a retired engineer from the Portland area. All of these people were our boat captains. And this is Brooke, another boat captain, and she's probably the closest we get to a professional boats person. She's gone to school for this kind of thing. All of these boat captains had been down the Colorado River before. They've had extensive rafting experience. For the most part, the rest of us hadn't. My daughter, Tessa, and me. So I show you this picture because this is what's called a J-boat. This wasn't us. But this is noteworthy because when I was 10 years old, I went down the Grand Canyon on one of these back in the 70s. And it was a much shorter, quicker trip, and turns out it was very different than the trip we ended up doing. And I'll talk more about them in a minute. So on the actual first day on the river, not the day that we were rigging, we didn't have to go very far, and we reached these Navajo bridges, which I showed you the pictures of before. And you can see our boats down below. And you can see there's rafts, and then we also had 2 inflatable kayaks. And as we got closer to these bridges, if you look really carefully, and I don't really have a way of pointing, there are 2 condors, California condors, hiding on these bridges. So they'd been successfully reintroduced into this area. And of course, since I'm doing this presentation here, I feel compelled to include something about birds. If you look real carefully, you can see them gliding. They, of course, love to soar on the thermals, but that was pretty neat. That's the first time I've ever seen a condor in the wild. Our first night, most of us had to learn how to do all of this because the regimen every day was you wake up early in the morning, you make breakfast, we all took turns doing that, you pack everything up, you load the boats, you spend the day on the river, you'll stop along the way, and I'm going to show you lots of places that we stopped. Then you stop for the evening, hopefully you get a good campsite, that's the whole thing, and then you unload all the boats, set up the kitchen, set up your camp, pass out around 8 or 9 in the evening, go to sleep, and do it all over again. It took us in the beginning 2-3 hours to load up every morning. We got that down to an hour, maybe about halfway through. But it definitely is a very well-coordinated event to do it correctly because the rafts have to be loaded in a particular way for weight, and things have to be spread out evenly, and certain rafts carry certain things, so it's pretty involved. I'll show you different pictures of rocks, but the rocks were amazing. This is Brooke explaining to us. Brooke was in charge of our itinerary, and she helped us figure out what we might see and when we might see it and how we would prioritize things. And that turned out to be a pretty tall order because not everybody agreed on what the priorities were. Some people were very focused on getting to camp and relaxing. Other people were very focused on, we want to see the sights along the way. Those didn't always jive. Of course, I was balanced in the middle. Yes. 16 of us. Yes. So this is a detail of how we would wash dishes. One of the things that we were concerned about was norovirus, because there had been outbreaks of norovirus on the river. People collectively in our group were far more worried about norovirus than they were about COVID. We had a conversation, we had Zoom meetings beforehand, and we talked about, well, what happens if someone gets COVID or something like that? And everybody was like, yeah, we'll just go. But if someone gets norovirus, oh man, that's going to be bad. because that is something that is pretty violent and things come out of everywhere, and it's not like you're going to go to a hospital. Really, on this entire trip, our only remedy was to fire up the satellite phone and call in the Park Service helicopter. You weren't going to be hiking out. That was really your only option during the whole time. So we have this whole system of how we would wash dishes, including a bleach wash. We did a lot of bleach. Our hands all got really messed up from the constant hand washing and bleach, but no one got sick. And then at the end, we would strain the water before we'd put it back into the river. We even had tarps that we put down so that it would collect food, and we would shake those out. And the result of that is when you went to a camp, it really looked like no one had ever been there. It was rare to find trash. And then you'd be incensed that you've found a small piece of trash there. But then you think, well, let's see, 22,000 people. Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. So the only thing that you could leave behind was basically your urine. Everything else came with you, came with us. This is what we call the groover. And I was lucky enough to spend half the trip on groover duty. And it was my job to find a scenic spot for the groover, set it up, and then pack it up at the each morning before we go. And that turned into a whole thing. So this is 16 people that were pretty much strangers. I mean, we all knew some of us, a few of us, but none of us knew all of us. And so that was a very interesting experience to get familiar with everything, everyone, because you did everything together with everyone for the whole 19 days. And we had a whole system where you could have privacy that I'll show you later with that. But it's a very scenic spot right there. And it's basically just an ammo can with a toilet seat on it. This is a camp. I spent about half of my nights in a tent and about half of my nights out on a pad. Most people just slept out in a pad, out al fresco. There weren't really issues with bugs or snakes or scorpions. We saw lots of scorpions. I'm going to show you a picture of a snake, but they didn't. It's weird. They didn't mess with you. I was usually pretty hot in the tent too, but it was nice to have a little bit of privacy, and also because of all of my camera gear and stuff, I could spread it out and charge it and do all that. Lots of interesting wildlife. This is a moth, and that's a banana. And this moth was like the size of a bat. And for whatever reason, it was attracted to the banana. I don't know why. I've never seen a moth that big. It was beautiful. And it's a bottle of Cholula. I don't think it was attracted to the Cholula. This is starting out one morning. It got to a point where you saw so many constant, beautiful vistas that you kind of got tired of it, and you had to remind yourself, like, oh yeah, that is stunning, that is gorgeous, because it never stopped. It just kept going and going, and every now and then you'd have to kind of go, wait a minute, this is quite something. This is early on in the trip. I'll talk about the whole protocol for running rapids, but this was, I think, before one of our first ones, and so there was a little bit of angst that you can see on maybe Tessa's face. Here we are scouting. We pull over above a rapid, and bigger rapids we will check out and see what it looks like and chart a course through the rapid, because of course the goal is to get through it successfully without flipping or anybody falling off. There they are scouting. You can see a hole off to the left, figuring out the route through it. And this is entering a smaller rapid. Some of these, I'll be curious to get your feedback on this. I don't know how this plays in terms of what the rapids look like. I know what it felt like to go through them, and I'll be curious to see if the pictures do that justice. This, I don't know if this looks significant to you or not. It's not an especially big rapid, but we had a phrase that we would use, and it was the seemingly inconsequential ripple. And the issues we had with boats getting stuck, people falling out, all happened on the inconsequential ripple. The big rapids, we were prepared for, we helmeted up, we did them, it went great, but we had issues on the small, tiny stuff, which is just kind of ironic to me. But I think it's because people were too comfortable, let their guard down, and that was an interesting phenomenon. We saw lots of bighorn sheep. These are females. You could get pretty close to them. I didn't get any good pictures of them, but I saw some beautiful males as well. There's like 4 in this picture. They'd come down to the water to drink and feed on the greenery. Beautiful lizards. Beautiful cactus. These are some ruins. I'm going to show you different pictures of different areas that we went to. Up above the ruins, you could climb into this cave, and there was a hole, and you can see we're up pretty high. There was a hole at the back of it looking down into this slot canyon, which was this slot canyon. And it was a pretty neat thing to crawl up there and then look out into this expanse. If you look kind of the left, there's a person there hiking, maybe the left third in the middle. Pictographs, multiple instances of those we saw. The neat thing about this trip compared to when I did it when I was a kid is we blew through the Grand Canyon. I think it was like a week or 10 days, something like that, on a motorized boat. We hardly ever stopped. On this trip, we stopped constantly, and it was a very different experience, much better, I would say. More pictographs, pottery shards, and even bits of turquoise. So this is above, there are a whole bunch of rapids. I'm not going to bore you with all the different ones and all that, but this is above a rapid called Crystal Falls. And I have that look because I was a little apprehensive, because when I was 10 and we did this on the big J boat, it was one of the rapids where that was a paid tour, and the boatsmen, the guides, during the whole trip leading up to this, talked about Crystal Falls. And we even saw a picture, I think it was from, I don't know, Life magazine or something, of a big boat like ours in Crystal Falls about to flip over. And so, and we think they did this for dramatic effect, just to, I guess, make the experience more memorable. So we were in this spot above Crystal Falls when I was 10, and they had scouted it. And there were some very big holes, very big waves in the middle of the rapid. And so we're pulling out, and the motor stops. And we're like, come on, start up the motor. And he's trying to start it. Come on. And he's like, no, I'm trying to start it. And we're floating, headed towards the rapid. We're sideways. He's trying to start it. He can't start it. And then all of a sudden, it dawns on us when the guide says, all right, everybody, hang on tight. And we're headed towards this huge wave, sideways, which is not the way to do it. We have this picture in our mind of this boat flipping that we had seen. And everybody gets hysterical. My mom was crying and sobbing. People were saying goodbye. It was quite a thing. And so we go through it, and we didn't flip, but we got pretty close, and it was quite a traumatic event. So here I'm having flashbacks, and it turned out really not to be a big deal for us. But part of the difference is in the smaller, these are 16-foot rafts that we were on. you don't necessarily aim for the middle of the rapid and the big holes and waves like you might on one of those big J boats. We generally try and avoid that stuff just to get through the rapid safely, because it's a lot more consequential if we flip. So here is Greg navigating a rapid. Here's another one. There were times when he would ask me to buddy row, and so you can kind of see my hand there on the right-hand side to help him if he needed a little help. But it could be quite hectic. This is a place called Redwall Cavern, which is pretty neat and pretty special. And we pulled over there for a little while. And we got out, and this gives you an idea of the scale of it. We played Frisbee in there. It was pretty neat space. That gives you a feel for what it's like. This is one of those iconic spots. Lots of amphitheaters like that, all along the way. And we went by another one, and we'll give it a minute here. We were surprised to see, wait for it, so if you look in the middle, up on the sand dune, there's a small string quartet playing. And we just happened upon this. And it was the neatest thing, because you didn't expect it, we didn't know it was going to be there. And just out of the blue, you start hearing something. And it's like, what is that? And then we come across this. We had a chance to talk to one of their guys that's in that boat with the umbrella. And they told us where they were going to be the next morning and to meet them there. And we actually got up early, and they weren't there for some reason. So we were really disappointed. But this was the coolest thing to come across. So we sat there for a while. I won't play at all, but it was pretty neat. And of course, the amphitheater's projecting the sound out. And there's a better shot of what they looked like up there. So that was pretty cool, one of the highlights for me. More wildlife. This is Nankoweap, and those are granaries up to the right. This is another iconic spot. And just, you have to hike up there, and it's just beautiful, beautiful views. There's a close-up. People speculate, why did they put these way up so high? I don't know that anybody has an answer. We discussed it at length. I don't know that we agreed on anything, but it's neat to see. A rare picture of me, because I'm usually taking the pictures. Tessa took that. More cactus down lower. Pulling over in the evening. Especially beautiful light. This is our kitchen setup. Most of our food was like sous vide bags, frozen bags, that we'd throw in hot water. That was the extent of our cooking. That actually worked out really well, because after all day on the river, you were not necessarily motivated to prepare big meals. And you can see the tarp that would catch all the food. You can see the wash bins, and it was quite an undertaking. We all had different teams, and we would rotate every few days and take turns doing all of it. Shameless commercial plug. I actually brought one of these mugs for everybody on the trip, and they turned out to be quite a hit, and these are available in the shop. Another campsite. Here we were both in tents, Tessa and I. Of course, that was one of the highlights for me, is being able to spend 19 days with my daughter. And when they reach their 30s, you don't necessarily have that opportunity. So that in itself was probably once in a lifetime opportunity, let alone doing the whole Grand Canyon. So that was pretty cool for me. Rattler. Didn't see a lot of them. This one was kind of exciting. Several people were way into it. So several days later, after we saw the string quartet, we were going down the river and we saw all these empty rafts, and we're like, what? And there's no one around. It's like, what's going on here? So we pull over, and there was a big, beautiful slot canyon here. And we go up the slot canyon, and we had stumbled across the quartet again. And we thought we had only seen him that one time, and we missed them the second time, and we weren't going to see them again. And we stumbled across them, and this time was even better. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I'll play a few minutes of it to give you a feel. And if you can imagine being, it's just magic. So the acoustics were amazing in the slot canyon, and it was really, really cool. We actually caught two pieces that they played. And the gentleman on the left works for the Seattle Symphony, and we came to understand that he does these trips periodically and asks musicians to come along with him. This is one of the things that they do. Anyway, you get the idea. Yeah, it was really, really neat. So these are some J boats, and they were filled with young folk from the Conservation Corps. And they were, I think some of them might have been students, teenagers, that were from the Navajo tribe and also from Albuquerque. And they were on a multi-day trip through the Conservation Corps to remove invasive species. And you may be familiar with our Conservation Corps up here. It was neat to talk to them, hear about where they were from. And many of these were like city kids from Albuquerque as well. So that was a neat thing to come across. I believe this is a sequence of going through one particular rapid, and this will kind of give you a feel for what it's like. And there would be times when you'd hit big holes, and the bow of the raft would come up dramatically. We had different party or theme nights, and this was Burning Man night, and we each had different nights that we were responsible for. Bill and Nancy, who are from Reno, who frequent Burning Man, did this, and Glenn, at this point, asked us to always refer to him as Falcon Spirit. And so that became his new name. I wasn't very compliant. I would refer to him as Commander Falcon, Mr. Spirit. It got bastardized all different kinds of ways. But this is how we would typically spend our nights. We would get our food, come and sit, eat, drink. It was a neat time every evening. Bragg and Glen and Brook, all groovy. You can see solar panels behind Glen's head, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit because I had to keep my equipment charged for 19 days, and there are not power outlets on the Grand Canyon. So this is where the Little Colorado River hits the Colorado River, and you can see there's like literally a line, and you may know that the Little Colorado River is this beautiful turquoise water, and you can see here where it hits the Colorado. And we hiked up a ways. On the left is Navajo territory, on the right is National Park. And one of the things that you can do is sit on your life jacket and float down the Little Colorado. And I did a little video. Here we are scouting more rapids. You can tell how serious we thought a rapid was by whether or not we're wearing helmets. Some pictures we are, some pictures we aren't. Here we're all helmeted up. So this was a significant one. Another slot canyon. See the people at the very bottom to give you some scale. Hiked up it again. Often we would go up these just to get out of the heat, because they'd be cool and they'd be in the shade and there'd often be water in them. So it was very nice. Here's a little bit of water, beautiful colors. And this one, we just like laid up there for an hour in the cool air. Someone told me I snored. Hiking back. Cooling off. Notice the color of the water. So we were frequented by storms, thunderstorms, and the tributaries flowing into the Colorado would bring mud and debris, and it would change the color. And in the beginning, it was all green, and then we had a couple days where it got kind of brown, and then it got green again and cleared up, and then it was just pretty much brown as we got farther down, and very silty. Some of the weather that we experienced. This was an especially spectacular day. Looking the other way, beautiful sunsets. More rapids. Just cool water shot, I thought. You can see Tessa on the left. This is another slot canyon, and it's called Elves Chasm. And you can't really see the scale too well here, but down below, you can swim across, and down below you can climb up and go to the gallery in the middle and then jump off. And so we would do that. And here's me climbing back behind the waterfall. And then here's a few shots of me jumping off into the water, coming out of the water. And then the people watching me. Another side excursion. This one, we had to get a rope out to climb up, but our goal was to see these fossils. And I don't know if you can see it that well down by Brooke's hands, but here's a close-up. It was some, I don't know, cephalopod or some kind of giant sea worm thing. And we saw different fossils and things like this along the way. Scouting, another rapid. We must not have been too concerned because we all have hats on the river. We would switch around boats. It's not like we were assigned to one boat the whole time. You would migrate from boat to boat with different people. And that was a neat experience because you'd get to know people because you'd spend all day sitting with them on the river. A lunch stop, we'd pull out a table. Whoever was on breakfast duty would have prepared lunch so we could do lunch pretty quickly. So this gives you a flavor of what it's like to go through a rapid. So I never rode a raft before, and one of my secret hopes was that I might have an opportunity to do that. And it turns out that we had lots of opportunity to do that because it's a lot of hard work to row all day long. And part of what you wouldn't expect, I certainly didn't expect, is it's not like you just sit in the middle of the river and float your way down 277 miles. You're actively rowing to stay in the correct spot because there are constantly eddies that are trying to pull you back upstream or take you into rocks or whatever. So you're constantly paying attention and you're constantly rowing. And if you don't, it can make the difference between you going upstream or not moving or going downstream. So it was a lot of work. And our experienced oars people, boat captains, were happy to get the help. And it turned out they were really good instructors. So both Tessa and I got a lot of oar time, which was very cool and very exhilarating. So this gives you a feel of going through and kind of how violent it can be, the ups and the downs. And, you know, I think of these as somewhat like ocean waves, but they're not near as predictable as ocean waves because they come and go very quickly. So, like, you can see the wave to the left, that may disappear as you get to it, or it may double in size. I mean, it's just all very random. And I learned very quickly that navigating through these is a cross between your intention and where you want to go, but not fighting the river, because you're not going to win when you fight against the river. And actually, you can get hurt if you try and fight too hard. Bill, who was with us, had ripped out his rotator cuff on a previous trip because the oar ripped out of his hand. So this is Phantom Ranch. This is, I don't know, maybe halfway-ish down. And that's the Kaibab bridge that goes across. There's two bridges that cross in this area. One's the Bright Angel that's a little farther down, and this one. And we pulled over here, and these are ancient native, I don't know, house sites, something like that. I think this is maybe their version of affordable housing. But old ancient stuff there, and this is the bridge, and you can see the wood in the middle for the mules that go up and down, which I'll show you in a minute. Neat bridge, though. And then when you hike up the canyon, you start seeing the resort. I don't know if you can see it. There's a little cabin back there, and cabins scattered about. And this was designed by the famous architect that worked for the Harvey Company. Jeannie will know her name. Yeah. And there was a time when this was like, I don't know if it was the 50s or the 60s, this was like the place to go, and it was really hard to get in here, and, you know, the Hollywood elite would go here and stuff. And still now it's really hard to get reservations. And you can either hike down, or you can take the mules down. But it was a nice stop for us. This is what the cabins look like. It was a really cool place because they have a little store, and they have ice, and they have cold drinks. And that was quite a treat. Ice cream bars, things like that. That they have to bring down on mules there. And you can send letters, and they get postmarked that they were carried on muleback, back up. So here are Brooke and Nancy enjoying lemonade and writing postcards. Those are the mules. Just another, probably a lunch stop or a hike stop. This was an old boat from 40s or 50s. There were all kinds of stories in the guidebooks about people who went down and were never heard from again, and they found their boats some miles away down the river. So this was one, but this was neat because it wasn't well known, and they said it's kind of in this area, and we were actually able to find it, and been there, I don't know, 70 years or something. Still a lot of it intact. And there were other places where we just saw like random old boats up on the side, up above the high water. So another J boat, and here's something interesting about these J boats, is they have a lot of ice. And one of the things that we found is that we're battling heat and we're battling ice, and we were super anal retentive about going into the coolers, and it turns out we weren't anal retentive enough because we ran out of ice. And we had great debate amongst our party as to whether you should drain the coolers or keep the cool water in the coolers to maintain the temperature. We learned the hard way what the right answer is. Does anybody have a guess? Why? Yeah, it turns out you drain it because the water conducts heat more so than the air does. But we had some people that didn't agree with that and insisted on keeping the cold water in there, which is one of the reasons why we ran out of ice. So the J boats, though, have a lot of ice, and these are the commercial outfitters, and they are, in my opinion, very smart, very shrewd at PR, and they'll give you ice. So when someone gives you the ice you're lacking, you tend to be more tolerant of the noisy motors as they go by, disturbing your peaceful rafting excursion. So here's us getting ice. Because we ran out of ice, some of our food spoiled, and towards the end we were concerned about running out of food. And the last couple days we were near where the commercial outfitters would pull out. They would drop their patrons off at a ranch and they would helicopter them away, and then the employees would take the rafts a little bit farther down, but they often had food, and so we were lucky enough to get peanut butter and crackers and things like that towards the end, and more ice to keep us whole, so we didn't starve. This is Havasu Creek, and the only way you can get to it is through the water. And so you actually pull in, and I don't know if you can see the ropes, but you tie off to, well, you can see one in the far left corner. People have put climbing gear in there that you can tie off to. And then you wade up the creek, and there's a pretty strong current there. It wasn't easy. There's Tom and Vicky helping each other up. And then it opens up into just this beautiful creek. And I think this is the, I believe, Havasupai that live here and have this land. And their origin story is, this is where Havasu Falls is. We couldn't go up there, it was closed. But that's where they believe life started, so it was pretty cool. Ferns. So this is just a beautiful evening. Notice the Brown River, big sand dune. And then to your bottom right, you'll notice there's two buckets there. And those two buckets indicate that this is a groover location. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's typically a paddle. And if the paddle is across the path, that means the groover is occupied. And if the paddle isn't, that means you're free to go. And then the groover would be in some beautiful scenic location back in those bushes. And that's a hand washing station. And so we were all really good about washing our hands when we were done with soap and bleachy water. This is above that area. This is one of our campsites, this beautiful rock up behind us. And this was Tessa and Mai's event night. And we decided to have haiku night. And so I made little cards that explained what a haiku was and gave people booklets, and consistent with the Japanese theme, we brought sake and rice crackers, and that was a big hit, and it was a surprise to people. And these are everybody working on their haikus. And I'll share some with you. Quiet and thunder, rainbows, rain, and wind, movement and stillness, another one. Cascade laughing bright, plunging elves swim deep green pool, now I'm home again. And we had a little contest, and Vicky won with this one. So that was fun, and people enjoyed it, and it was different. Some people had a luau and brought like Mai Tai stuff and special appetizers, and there was the rave night and different things. So that was fun. This is same spot a little later. Notice the red glow with the sunset. This place, I recall, some of the places you had to be real careful because the current was really strong, and you did not want to stumble or fall in. And you were discouraged from going to the bathroom in the night because you didn't want to fall into the river and never be heard from again. Just more evening scenery. This, I think we were off hiking probably to hear a surprising amount of water in the desert, in these slot canyons. Many streams we went to. This was especially spectacular one. Here we're hiking up to a different area. Watercress along the way. We had watercress salad, which was neat. I didn't expect to find that there. We're hiking up. You can see our rafts as we get higher. We're going up this canyon. You can see the water to the right, and you can see the hikers to the left. There's Tessa and her in-laws. Beautiful view, the river below. And so you'd hike along the left, and if you're afraid of heights, this probably wouldn't be a place for you because you look down to that. It's beautiful. And then you came upon this. There's Tom. And this. Tessa and the waterfall. And this. And that, and just these magic oases that you wouldn't expect were there. I believe here we're hiking to scout Lava Falls. This is Lava Falls. It's a notorious rapid. It's the biggest rapid on the river. Some angst over this. Look at how muddy and chocolatey the river is at this point. We were able to watch another outfitter, another group of rafts go through. Here they are, down below us, getting ready to go through. You can see them going in. And there's a whole strategy. I think on this one you were supposed to stay to the left, and you'll see why. But you don't want to go too far to the left. If you look, there's kind of a space to the right that you kind of want to aim for. And you have limited ability to influence that. You don't have complete control over that. A lot of it is just positioning and timing. And then you don't want to go too far to the left because that's really nasty over there to the left. And the risk is that you get stuck in some of those holes. You could flip, you can get stuck, and it can take some time to get spat out. It's really not, you can get pinned under rocks. It's really, the people who were the experienced captains had done lots of rafting on other rivers, and they had all kinds of horror stories of seeing bodies pinned under rocks and just nasty stuff. So going deeper into it. And notice that rock in the upper left corner, because that will be noteworthy in a minute. You wanted to avoid that rock in the upper left. And it's... of course, part of it is the current is taking you towards these things. That's why there's big waves and stuff there. The other part is that whole idea that when you focus on something, that tends to be the thing that happens. So you've got that going on. But you can see how it's getting pulled closer to it. There's some rafts below it that have made it through. But there it's getting even closer. You can see it real close to the rock because you're getting sucked over that way. Now it's our turn. So we're entering big waves. There's that rock on the right that we saw. Getting closer, really close. We do not want to get stuck or pinned on that because you would flip pretty quickly. And then that was the hairy part right there. And then we were happy we made it through. Knuckle bump with our captain, John. And then we're not done. And there's this series of pretty big holes right up against this wall that you need to stay out of. And that's one of the warnings of this, is when you go through the main part, you're not done and you have to pay attention. But we successfully made it through that. There was a lot of angst about this rapid, and John here was very happy that he successfully navigated us through it. And then you pull over at what's called Tequila Beach, and you celebrate the fact that you didn't die. And everybody had shots of tequila there. Speaking of drinking, we drank a lot of water, and we had to filter water, and that was a whole thing. Someone was on water duty, and we'd fill these jugs. And here's Tessa with, there's a whole contraption that you can't see, but below her are these buckets, and when the water gets silty, you have to let the water sit for hours to let the silt settle, because otherwise it'll clog the filters. And if you clog the filters, then you can't filter water, and then that's a problem. Because we used the filter water, of course, to drink, and because it was so hot, you went through a lot of water, and we used it to cook as well. There's Falcon Spirit drinking the Putzenwasser. Here's Jonah doing sand art. Jonah was fascinating. Jonah speaks like 5 languages. He worked at the UN. I believe his grandfather was ambassador to the UN for Guatemala. He's got this really interesting history, and his whole family who was with us. And these were his shoes, his sandals. And I like the meet nature part of that. And this was his tattoo. And it's in Hebrew. And I believe it says, "Heal the earth." And I just thought that was really, really cool. Dinner time, probably, there were some very funny people. John Malone, the attorney from Reno, one of the funniest people I've ever come across, had us regularly in stitches. It looks like Tom found something he said funny. Another waterfall. What was cool about this, though, is you could go up behind it, and there was like this little hidden grotto. And so you climb behind the waterfall into this space. There's Nancy in there, and then the waterfall also goes off to the right. And there's Debbie, actually, under it. It was real dark in there, but it was neat in there. This is, again, we're scouting another difficult rapid. This doesn't look like much, but there's this big, huge rock that was really treacherous, that everything's pulling you towards the rock, and you need to avoid the rock and not get too close to it, because then you have other rocks below it, and we made it safely through it, but it's things like that that were a little concerning at times. Tessa did a great job learning to row and navigating, and this is not easy work. Sleeping at night. So these big black rocks would radiate a ton of heat, and I'm going to speed up here so that we're not here until 1 in the morning. But that's Tessa and Sam. That's typically how people would sleep. I think we were looking at some kind of wall art or something there. Fossils, more beautiful cactus. This is a place called Indian Canyon, and this is old remnants from, I think, a survey party. And it was also called Indian Canyon because the Indians lived here, and this supposedly is an agave roasting pit. If you can see that impression to the left. Just cool rocks. The inflatable kayaks. Unless it was a really bad, big rapid, people would be in those. We'd take turns using them. But if it was a big, bad rapid, we would put them on the rafts. Here's me paddling. Oops. This is a place called Pumpkin Springs. When I was 10, I went in that, but apparently now it's all putrid and gross. But kind of interesting the way it forms. And then up above it, if you walk up into these cliffs, you find all these really cool eroded passageways, and you can see Nancy and Tessa kind of like down in there, in all these channels that were carved. Going up another canyon, cooling off. Tessa's sleeping. I typically woke up, I don't know, 4:30 or 5 when the sun started coming up, in part so I could get all my gear ready. Cooling off. Sometimes we would just sit in the water because it was so freaking hot. Tessa cooling off, Tom and Vicky, and it was very pleasant. The water got warmer as we went farther down the canyon. So it started in the 50s, and then it probably got into the 60s. But when the air temperature's in the hundreds or 110s, if the water's 60 degrees, it's actually rather pleasant. Rowing. One of the things that would happen is we would have days where we would have to row a lot, and the river wouldn't move especially quickly. And when the wind came up, it was hellish, and you'd be rowing against the wind. And sometimes you'd be rowing as hard as you could, and you would not be moving. So that's one of the reasons why we would take turns. So there were a few days like that, and we'd get up earlier. Another really cool slot canyon that was hard to navigate because you couldn't walk up the water because it was all mossy and super slippery. So you had to do like these kind of pressure bouldering move things like this, where you'd kind of shimmy along to get up there. But it was worth it because this is what waited for us up here. It opened up into these shelves of rock. Me and Tessa, nice group shot of everyone. More rowing with Tessa, getting a little wet. So if you look at that bag on the left, that's a solar panel in a dry bag floating in the river to keep it cool. Because if I had it out on the raft, it would get so hot that it would stop charging. So I came up with this means of keeping it cold with a painter line tied to it. Another waterfall. This one was on one of the Native American territories, and that's why there's a ladder. None of the other places had ladders like this to get to it, but this is what was up at the top. It was kind of in this cavern. Sam and Maria. Ravens. They would follow you sometimes. You did have to watch out for your food and gear because they'd been known to take them. More cool rocks. Just varied. I'm not a geologist, but the rocks were just breathtaking and varied, and you go through all these different strata. Those are some kind of fossils. I think that was at a place called the Book of Worms, which I thought was a clever name. Or rocks, Tessa cooling off. So here we're getting to the end of our trip, and this is the last night. And in order to make it on time to Pierce Ferry, where the outfitter was going to meet us and take us away and take our equipment, we had to be there by 8 o'clock the morning of the 8th. And so in order to do that, we had to raft all night long the night before to get there. So the strategy was you would lash all your rafts together into one big giant raft. And at this point in the river, it was pretty calm, and you were typically going through silt banks because you now were into Lake Mead, and the Lake Mead was so low that the river had cut through the silt banks. And so you drifted and people paid attention, but you didn't have to actively row at this point like you did normally. So it got darker, some people slept, and then as we got closer, we were looking for where we needed to pull out because we didn't want to miss the pullout because there was a rapid just below the pullout that, because of the low lake levels, had been eroded and was impassable. And so you did not want to go, you couldn't. I mean, I guess you would spit out the other side, but you did not want to go through it. So there was a little bit of angst, making sure we found the spot, so we were regularly watching the shoreline. And it was eerie at night, too, because the silt banks would collapse. So you'd hear these, like, these falling sounds off in the distance. It was surreal. But we found it successfully. I think we got there like 4:30 in the morning or something, ahead of schedule, which was nice. And then we started to break things down. I needed to get home, and I also had to take Tessa to the airport in Las Vegas. And this place, Pierce Ferry, is a good 2-3 hours from Flagstaff in the opposite direction. So I arranged to have my car ferried here, dropped off here. And I had a little angst over, I hope my car's there when I get there. And the other issue was, this car, like many common cars, has a keyless fob, which does not let you lock it in the car. And so the car service said, yeah, just lock your keys in the car. And I'm like, I can't do that. And so that was like a whole thing. But anyway, we figured it out. I called the Subaru dealer, and they told me to wrap my fob in foil. Turns out there was a better solution than that. But anyway, my car was there. That worked out awesome. We had to deflate and take everything apart and lay on the rafts. You can see people laying. We were tired, too, because most of us were up most of the night. And pull everything out. We broke 3 oars at $450 a piece. We didn't get our deposit back. Like I said, we were tired. And then I'm going to leave you with my favorite shot of the whole trip. This is the last evening. All right, unless there's other questions, I appreciate your patiently listening to this and for joining me. So thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, and very good to see you.